Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode here of just me kind of ranting and talking, really. I know, two for the price of one, right? I haven't been on here for months, and now I'm just dumping all kinds of shit. This is just what happens when a teacher has a lot of fucking time on their hands, I guess. Is they just start rambling about all the random things that their hobby, that they get obsessed with, but don't have the ability throughout the year to actually talk about. Yeah, anyway, that's a great intro here to the best melee classes of 5th edition. Don't get me wrong, when I first kind of thought of this and I made the presentation, because I like to give you something to look at least if you're watching it on YouTube. I highly recommend that you don't. Just have it in the background, because my graphics are not fantastic. I'm afraid that I'm a talker, I'm a rambler, but in terms of digital masterpieces, you can definitely not expect anything from me. But anyway, I created this a while ago, so I knew that probably if I had to go back, I probably would have gone a little bit more in depth. But again, I kind of just had the itch to make something, but I didn't want to spend hours and hours making something that I already kind of had the blueprint for. And when I went back and I looked at it, I was like, okay, I kind of see what I was going with. I was trying to go for short, sweet, to the point. Because sometimes my videos can go for 50 minutes, which I know is a lot. So instead, I just came up with some basic ideas here, some basic comparisons, in which I spell out what I believe to be the best melee-based classes here of D&D 5th edition. So let's go ahead and let us get going. So what is it we're going to be looking at? Well, I give you melee classes broken down into what I believe are their primary components. The best DPR, which is just damage per round. The best Nova melee class. The toughest to kill melee class. The melee class with the most utility, so the classes that can go out and do more than just be in combat. And then finally, I will give my interpretation, my belief, my 2 cents on what I think is the best of all the melee classes. And hopefully, maybe, I'll convince you if you thought otherwise. But let's go ahead and get right on into it here. So with best DPR, I give you the Battle Master Fighter. Now, when I first made this list, I contemplated throwing in instead Hexblade. But then when I kind of thought about it, and I said, okay, well, the biggest thing about the Hexblade is their ability to do all of their wonderful Hexbladeness, aka adding their proficiency and getting the +1 magic weapon and all of that to it. A lot of people tend to forget that you can only do that once a short rest. So, if we're going with DPR, which means someone who can routinely pump out decent damage and not have something like, hey, you have to take a short rest every single time in order to do this once, I realized that, okay, I can do Hexblade. That really kind of throws out things like Paladins and even some of the new fighters in which a lot of their stuff comes in during a short rest. In which it's all or nothing, right? Like, it's either I take a short rest and I get all my shit back, or I don't take a short rest and I have nothing. And instead, the more I thought about it, the more I was like, you know what? There's really one fighter that has stuck through and through that gives you so much options, gives you so great abilities, and you get it right out of the gate. And that's the Battle Master here. So battle maneuvers are so fun. I love having my Battle Masters, my D8s, which, again, another fighter that I knew it was going to be a fighter, right? Like, it's got to be a fighter. You start off with heavy armor. You start off with that heavy weapon, the martial weapon proficiency. You start off with a fighting style. So I knew if we're looking at pure DPR, I knew it was going to be a fighter. The question was which fighter was going to kind of outplay the others. And eventually, it basically came down to either the psionic warrior, the psi fighter, the one that uses the psionic dice, or the battle master. But what really kind of cinched it for me was just so much of the psionic fighter is that you realize that besides the once every turn to add a D6 until it becomes a D8 at like 5th level, you're not really actually doing too much, whereas the Battle Master, you can throw as many of these Battle Master, these battle dice, these, whatever the fuck they're called, the battle maneuver dice, as often as you wanted. and you get a nice solid chunk of them. They all come back on a short rest, which is more than what you can say than the psionic dice. Like, you can run out of the psionic dice. You know, here you get so many, and they all come back on a short rest. I couldn't think of why the psionic die would, why the Psi Warrior would outplay the battle maneuver. Now, I hear some people going, but wait, you're talking about DPR. Why aren't you going Barbarian? Because after all, a Barbarian doesn't need anything, right? Like a Barbarian, as long as you can rage, you have all of this ability, which, you know, theoretically, once you get to a certain level, you know, your one rage is probably going to outlast, you know, your battle maneuver dice. And I agree. The problem is that the Barbarian, this is going to, I might be kind of, I'm jumping the gun here a little bit. And I know, but it's the only way I can really explain why the Barbarian is only going to show up once on this whole list. So I'm afraid, spoiler alert. And that is the fact that the Barbarian sucks so fucking bad. I wish I had something nice to say about it, but as someone who has played Barbarians multiple times, it is so god-awful at everything else. And as soon as a DM realizes, because here's the thing, right? Like, you can look at it at a, you know, the damage outlook. Barbarians only get to rage like 2 or 3 times until like level 6. And then they get to rage, I think it's 3 or 4. Like, I forget what the next increment is. But, like, that basically means, like, 3 combats. 2 or 3 combats. And on top of that, if a DM is really on your case, if a DM is, like, really heavily, like, I am monitoring how often you are able to rage, and they are keeping track of, hey, you went a whole round where you didn't hit anything, which means they were keeping track of the rounds you missed an attack. And then also, hey, no one attacked you, so your rage was lost last round. Like, if you have a DM that's really kind of on your case about that, like, you may find yourself running, you know, plowing through your rages very quickly. Whereas battle maneuver fighter, I just find that you end up with more DPR from battle maneuvers than you do with barbarians. So I know that was a really long-winded explanation, but basically just barbarians are not as good as people give them the credit for in every aspect we like to give them credit for. There's at least one that they're very good at, but everything else, they're not as good as you think. So anyway, I'm sorry. This was a long-winded explanation to basically just say that Battlemaster Fighter, in my opinion, if you stack it up against every single other fighter out there, don't get me wrong, we could easily make some really fucked up, you know, multi-class Hexblade, Barbarian build, Paladin, Sorcerer Lock, you know, that could absolutely outmaneuver it. But if we're looking at just pure DPR, if you are, you know, wanting to start a class tomorrow, hopping into a one-shot at level 3 or 4, and your goal was to make something that has an incredible amount of DPR, you can't outplay the Battlemaster Fighter. You can't. So, now, of course, that does not mean that they are not without their weaknesses. We do have the fact that they are with no magic. So, we all know that in 5th edition, magic is king. And sadly, as a Battlemaster Fighter, you will not have any magic. And very low utility. Don't get me wrong, a lot of those battle maneuvers can actually kind of help out in ways that are not just pure damage. But if odds are most of your strength or most of your ability scores are going to be your strength, your con, maybe your dex, you're going to find yourself very quickly, you know, dumps are going to be your charisma and your intelligence guaranteed, which just means that as soon as you're off the battlefield, your utility is just shot. So, very good at DPR, not so great anywhere else. Alright, the Best Nova. This shouldn't come as a shocker to anybody. It is a Paladin class. Specifically, it is the Oath of Vengeance Paladin. You got Divine Smite, which if we're looking at a melee build, and this is melee builds only, alright, we're not looking at Nova rounds in total, right? We're looking at just melee classes here. Paladin is your best bet. Now, you could argue that there are a couple of other oaths out there that are just as good. My thing is with the Oath of Vengeance Paladin is that the Oath of Vengeance gives you some fantastic spells later. Between Hold Person, Hold Monster, Haste, Like, you can set yourself up. Like, no one realizes, like, if a paladin casts Hold Person and succeeds, then they now have advantage and will have auto crits, at least depending on who your DM is. I do believe Jeremy Crawford has ruled that if you are under the Hold Person or Hold Monster spell and you are attacked, then you are considered incapacitated. You are considered vulnerable to all melee hits within 5 feet. So, this big beefy paladin holds on you, puts a Hold Person on you, and can now start critting and can do Divine Smite on it. And on top of that can throw another smite out, although I will admit that might get a little janky, depending on who your DM is. If you say, hey, DM, if I stop concentrating on Hold Person at the start of my round so that I can real quick cast Banishing Smite on my weapon here, does the enemy right before I hit them, does it lose the Hold Person, or will it end at the end of the round? That's a conversation you have to have with your DM. I'm sure Jeremy Crawford and them have probably had some kind of conversation on it. I don't know about it. To be honest, I would probably rule that I don't know how I would rule it. That's kind of an interesting question of when I cast a concentration spell, does it immediately end the effect of it, or does it end it at the end of my turn? I don't know how I would rule it. Because this is the exact kind of situation where if this paladin casts Hold Person and then on their turn, were to bonus action cast one of the smiting spells and then add Divine Smite on top of it, holy fucking shit, do you end up with a Nova round. But whatever the case may be, I won't sit on here and contemplate it too long. That's a video in itself, I'm sure. But just this, in my opinion, is the paladin of paladins when it comes to a Nova round. And the fact that its Channel Divinity is really good. It gives you advantage on striking an opponent that you have picked, that you have chosen. And you also get other spells. I believe you get Hunter's Mark here with Oath of Vengeance. So, at low levels, you could just cast a simple Hunter's Mark on someone, and now you get an extra d6 of weapon damage on it. Like, these are great spells. Now, of course, this talks about weaknesses, and as you can already tell, most of what I've been saying here the last, 2 minutes has been spell, which obviously means a class that is half melee, half spellcaster they will run out of spells. And they will run out of it very quickly. And this is the problem with Nova rounds. This is the problem with Nova-based builds in general, is just once they're out of their spells, they're out. And since they were Paladin, I believe Tasha's did include the once a day can use their Channel Divinity to regain a spell slot of such and such level. But even then, that's only one spell slot, right? So that's one more Divine Smite. Not very, fucking Nova round. So for the sake of this comparison, it is really, really good when it has spell slots. But after a couple of rounds, odds are you're probably not going to have too many spell slots back. And low DPR. I know it's kind of hard to believe, but again, if this paladin is going into the thick of it, odds are for a decent chunk of their playthrough, it's, especially if they're going, even my picture in here has it, the sword and shield, or the spear and shield, or the mace and shield. If you're really trying to live up to that tank, you're going to have the situation where, you're going to have a D8, and, are you willing to concentrate on a Hunter's Mark? It'll definitely help out your DPR, but you're also in the thick of it, which means you're going to be constantly rolling concentration checks, and sadly, Paladins do not have a Constitution proficiency in their saving throws. So there's a pretty high likelihood that you're going to lose that Hunter's Mark very quickly. Same with that haste. So even though they have all these great spells, you're really going to have to, this may even be, one of those situations where you go one level fighter and then go the rest paladin, just so that you can maintain even just a little bit better of that concentration. But I digress. In terms of Nova, you can't argue it. Oath of Vengeance Paladin, in my opinion, is the best Nova melee-based class in D&D 5th edition. Alright, toughest kill, Totem of the Bear Barbarian. Need I fucking say more? Literally resistance to all damage types besides psychic. However, how often are you really coming across some psychic creature? Like, let's be real here together, right? Like, it's not common. So for the sake of brevity, you are resistant to all damages. You have the biggest health pool in the whole game. Your Constitution score is something that goes towards your AC as well, which means you have an incentive to have a monstrous Constitution. You could make the argument that, hey, if you're a fighter or even if you're a paladin, your strength would probably be number 1, your charisma would be number 2, which means your Constitution, talking about a paladin, your Constitution might very well be your 3rd score, so your Constitution might be a 12 or something. Whereas a barbarian, it's like, hey, your biggest score is your strength, your second biggest score is your con, like just no question asked, maybe even reversed. So huge hit point pool, resistant to all damages. You know it, we love it. It's why the Bear Barbarian is so feared by most DMs. They are notorious to kill, but they are also not without their weaknesses. Their biggest weakness being that they are completely useless in literally everything else. I have a video, it's one of my first ones, I do believe, which means I hadn't yet figured out audio. So I need to just take them off the channel and redo them now that I at least know how to make it so that, the music in the background isn't fucking blaring your ears out. But if you're curious, you can go watch it. I do have a video up right now that is all about how the Barbarian is the single worst class in D&D 5th edition. And I go into detail about explaining why I believe that is true. So I won't spoil it all here, but long story short, the biggest weakness of the Barbarian is that although they are really good at not dying, that is the only thing they're fucking good at. Even DPR, Nova rounds, even all that shit, they fall flat. So if you want to make a class that can withstand everything, sure, throw out a Bear Totem Barbarian. But as soon as the campaign calls for literally anything more than that, you're going to really regret having not picked anything else. All right, utility. We're almost done. I couldn't pinpoint one single subclass, which I tried to do. I tried to give you a subclass. I tried to go beyond just a basic class. I tried to give you a subclass, be as specific as I could. But I couldn't here with utility, and the reason why is because basically any of the melee-centered cleric options is a fantastic option. Go Tempest, go War Cleric, go Life Cleric, go Twilight Cleric. There's so many fantastic melee-based cleric options out there, and they are all fantastic at utility. Do you need a healer as you're smashing in skulls? Pick one of the clerics. Do you need a tank who can heal themselves up pretty well and have a monstrous AC with a decent hit point pool? Play a cleric. Do you need spells like Whole Person, Guidance, Bane, Bless? Do you need spells like Locate Object, Locate Creature, Lesser Restoration, Greater Restoration? The sky's the limit. The Cleric is probably one of the most utility-based classes outside of maybe the Bard. The Cleric is probably the single most utility-based class in 5th edition. And the fact that they have some fantastic frontline options, I couldn't not put it here in this position. So if I had to pick a single one, I would probably go Tempest. It does have a fantastic lightning ability where, it can deal some lightning damage to anyone who's close to it, gets a fly speed later. If I had to choose, maybe War Cleric as well. But really, any of these clerics would be fantastic. Now, of course, gotta talk about the weakness. The weakness here of any of these options is, of course, low DPR and low Nova. What you massively gain in utility, you also massively drop in terms of damage output. You put a level 5 cleric up there next to a level 5 barbarian, and you will notice very quickly, holy shit, am I not able to keep up with damage output. Same with a level 5 fighter, same with a level 5 paladin. You name it, the cleric very quickly realizes that, okay, I'm in a weight class I probably shouldn't be in. Now, of course, it's because they have all of these super awesome spells and utility-based things that they get to do. But it doesn't make it feel any better when you're running around with a D8 plus 4 weapon at level 5, and on average you're able to pump out 13 points of damage around at level 5 when you can attack twice. So I understand the meaning, I understand why this would upset some people, but I still think that it's a good class, and I still think it's the best utility. But you're definitely gonna, if you're aiming for a heavy bruiser, the cleric is probably not the best option for you. All right, which then of course brings us here to the final one, the best of the best, the single most effective, in my opinion, melee class in D&D 5th edition. It shouldn't surprise you. I doubt it does, and that is of course the Oath of Vengeance Paladin. You can't not give it to them. They have heavy armor. They have martial weapon prowess, which means that they have a fantastic AC and fantastic weapons. Literally any weapon the DM throws in the campaign, these guys can pick up. They have a great spell list. Again, I just named a few, such as Haste, Hold Monster, Hold Person, Hunter's Mark, but there's even spells that are actually surprisingly kind of well thought out in terms of utility. They get Misty Step, for fuck's sake, which is one of my favorite spells in 5th edition. I bet you if I added up how many times I've casted any spell in 5th edition, I bet you spells like Fireball, Haste, Dimension Door are probably, and Polymorph and Counterspell. I played a sorcerer for a while. Those are probably my most 5-use spells in all time, and I bet you Misty Step is probably up there more than most. If it's not number 1, I bet you it's at least in the top 3. And the fact that these guys get it, that allows them so much utility, so much versatility to be able to say, yeah, your door doesn't fucking phase me. Do I need to close the gap? Does my normal movement speed of 30 feet not get me to my destination? Okay, I go another 30 feet. I teleport as a bonus action. That's a fantastic ability here for this paladin. So they have a great spell list. We've already said that they are the king of the Nova round, and they just get better the higher spell slot they get. When they unlock things like, Branding Smite, Banishing Smite, Thunderous Smite, when they unlock the Hold Person, Hold Monster, Haste, just the higher level they go, they don't taper off, they don't plateau until arguably like level 13, 14. So, no, they are fantastic melee classes. King of the Nova round. And as I've said here, they can achieve high DPR if they are built correctly. Now, you will have low DPR for the first, probably tier 1. You really won't feel good about it until probably tier 2, so levels 5 through 10. Tier 1's levels 1 through 5. Tier 2 is levels 5 through 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 20. 4 tiers. But if you do it correctly, if you wait to, if you hold off that great weapon master, until level 5 or 6, when your proficiency bonus increases, when you have a couple of ability scores, at least one under your belt, so if you pull great weapon master or something at like level 8, you'll find yourself very easily able to keep up with a lot of the other big damage dealers every round without having to expand most of your resources to do so. And then when you do need to go Nova, you have all of these tools at your disposal. So if you build it correctly, you can have great DPR, not the highest of highest, but definitely in the top echelon, definitely in the top bracket, if you want to call it that. Fantastic Nova round, king of the Nova round. They have a great spell list. And in terms of utility, they are open to it. You have things like the ability to heal. You have things like lesser restoration. The lay on hands feat ability. They are able to be a little on the utility side. Now, they are, of course, just a small candle compared to the bonfire that is the cleric, but they definitely have some shared spells there. The paladin definitely does have some ability here, and if you are willing to maybe multi-class a little bit, maybe take a feat, maybe there's a couple of feats there that I can think of that allow you to swipe a couple of cleric spells or even wizard spells. Like, it is entirely possible that even just, one one level, one ability score improvement, one feat taken, or even just one or two spell levels multi-classed into, you can immediately open this thing up to an insane amount of utility. So that is how come I would argue in my mind that if you are looking to play the absolute king of all melee classes in D&D 5th edition, I cannot think of a better one than the Oath of Vengeance Paladin. Now, as I said, if we sat here and really tried to think up a one, all right, I know I created, a swordsman build that impressed even me with how much damage it ended up outputting. And it was an absolute monstrosity of, I believe, Paladin, Hexblade Warlock, Battle Master Fighter. Like, it was all kinds of shit. Like, don't get me wrong, we can come up with things crazy. But if we're trying to keep it simple, and if all we're just looking at is just sheer basic numbers of just, hey, I'm not trying to make some giant monstrosity, and I'm not trying to make something that comes online at level fucking 13. Alright, I want something that is good and hardy and useful from level 3 on. I argue that Oath of Vengeance is probably the single best melee class in all of D&D 5th edition. But, hey, that's my 2 cents, and it is worth less than 2 cents. I hope you enjoyed the video. It's been a while. Hopefully I keep making them out, but I have the honest feeling that I probably only got a couple more in me. And then once my break is over, I will go on another hiatus, but we'll see. But whatever the case, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I will catch you next time.